welcome Exiles with another 10D build. Toxic Rain Ballista Pathfinder. Now I have to be full disclosure, I went over budget. I ended up spending around 12D. It got a little bit away from me. But in my defense, holy guacamole, does 5 or 10 divines go a lot less far than it did the last time I did these challenges. Having divines be almost only 100C, I think they were 110C when I was doing this character, is just way harder than when 10 divines were 200C, because the money goes by so fast. Granted, some things are cheaper, but for the most part, the certain things that you get for cheap are the same level of cheap in the previous leagues, and there's not much compensation for the lack of money you have. Now, what am I doing for this character? I am doing a Pathfinder using... Probably shouldn't get hit by a touch of God, that would probably kill me. I am doing a Soul of Ascension plus Wilma's Requital. And the idea behind this whole setup here is every single time I get a Soul Eater stack, I'm not getting just 5% attack speed, I'm getting 10% because Wilma's makes the cast speed apply to the Ballista's attack speed as well. There's a few things where you get both the attack and cast speed from Wilma's Requital, things like Onslaught, things like Adrenaline, but for the most part, when you see a double stat that's like 10% increased attack and cast speed, you don't benefit from both of those things. And so the idea is, as I'm attacking, and you'll see I'm generating stacks. I should probably say how I'm generating stacks. When you place a Ballista, it can actually trigger a Mana Forged Arrow setup. So for example, here I have Mana Forged Arrow with Life Tap, and I have Rain of Arrows and Frenzy. So I'm generating frenzies. Whenever I'm placing a totem, I'm shooting those skills out, and that will generate hits, which then count for Soul Eater stacks. Even though I have Wilma's Requital, which comes with Ancestral Bond, the thing that makes my skills deal no damage and gives me +1 totem, it still counts as me hitting the enemy, even though they don't deal any damage. This character went 6 out of 7 on Ubers. I dramatically, fantastically choked on doing the Uber Cirrus. I don't want to talk about it, it was embarrassing. Uber Cirrus is just something where I just have an incredible ability to throw, more or less, and so that one kind of, you know, just sometimes that's how it goes. For the most part, Soul of Ascension while mapping, after having played the character, I actually had to level this character up because I didn't have a ranger the appropriate level. For the most part, while leveling the ranger, doing maps, I think I was somewhere in the range of consistently being like 5 to 15 Soul Eater stacks. Sometimes I'd go all the way up to 40, but there's a lot of times where you'd run a map and you'd have some space in between when you ran into a rare and the Soul Eater stacks would fall off. So roughly, for the most part, I was in the range of about 100% attack speed from these gloves. But when you do bosses, it gets a little bit higher on average because you get some time to ramp damage. And the more damage you have, the less ramp you have because you're killing the boss or whatever it is, and that happens from time to time. So you'll see here on this boss, we might ramp all the way up to like 12, 11 stacks, but by the time we do that, he's already dead, right? And by the time we get, oh, he lasted a few longer than I thought. By the time you get to there, you're moving on to the next boss, and that's just kind of what it is. All in all, this character was probably the strongest damage for the price and comes with the best, what's the word? I don't have to turn on my brain or think about what I'm doing because the boss is just, what's the word? It's one of those things where it's like you're placing totems and the totems are doing the targeting. I'm not doing the targeting, the totems are doing the targeting. I don't have to think about it. It has that level of playstyle. So it's great for bossing in that regard. But at the same time, mapping, it's a little bit awkward because this character really wants phasing because I mostly just want to walk around and there's a lot of me like running into monsters. So mainly in the future, if I was able to upgrade this a bit, I would probably go and do, what's the word? I would probably go and do,
Ultimate chaos.
oh, it's probably not a good place to put the ball. For the most part, we should be able to sustain, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal, I would say, in this fight. We have about 80 to 90 lucky suppress, so we shouldn't really die in fights like this where we can consistently, hopefully, dodge things. Slam's pretty much the only thing that kills us in this fight. We should be able to take a ball or two unless we don't suppress. If we don't suppress, he might be able to one-shot us on a high roll. With 6k HP, it's decent in terms of total HP ES when you have suppress combined with that. Just a small tidbit, if you're wondering about Ubers and thresholds to be consistently tanky on Ubers, most of the hits or things that are harder to dodge, like balls or annihilation from Exarch, stuff like that, most of the things that hit pretty hard, but they're a lot harder to dodge. It's good if you can get hit by at least one of those things. Because if you can get hit by one of those things, it's much easier to be able to get hit by once and then dodge the rest type of thing. And the threshold for that, in my experience, just at a baseline is generally 4 to 5k life with just suppression. That'll get you through most of the semi-hard to dodge things. We have a little bit more than that at 6k total EHP, but just a random like tidbit factor. If you're thinking, how much do I roughly need to be able to tank like a ball? That'll get you there alone. Or you could have something more like 5k with damage conversion or 6k with damage conversion. That stuff sort of adds up as well in terms of like what you need in terms of thresholds for a lot of the mechanics maneuvers. If we can place all these balls correctly on the...
It's me. Let me help you.
The horror must be stopped.
That's fair. That was not my best placement, whatever. I tried. I really did. Pathfinder is not an ascendancy I usually like just because I have to remember to turn on my life flask, and I'm not a big fan of doing that. I will say this, it is very good sustain for the investment level. Probably one of the best sustain nodes in the game in terms of like what it actually costs you to get it up and going. And what am I thinking? Even though it's such a really good sustain, I still am not necessarily a big fan of it due to the fact you have to continually remember to press your life flask. I like to have as little things on my mind as possible when playing a character, and Pathfinder life flask, remembering to turn it on is a bit of a thing that I don't like remembering to think about. It's not too bad to like just instinctively be pressing the key throughout mapping, I guess, like once per 5 seconds or whatever. It's not the end of the world, but a personal preference of mine is just to not have to think about it. It's my own thought process. Very, very good sustain. Playing it, it's clearly, as far as like easy, strong sustain goes, it's one of the best in the game and requires the least amount of investment. Like, for example, this is competitive with the level of like, right now I have, you'll see I have the Sorrow of Divine Flask, makes my life recovery from flask apply to my ES. So it's kind of like I'm playing Pious Path with a life flask, where my life recovery applies to my ES, and that allows me to pretend to be a Inquisitor almost with this life flask in terms of sustain. It's grouped up.
To save the future, the past must be sacrificed.
Yeah, close enough. Not my best placement. But anyways, that's the idea. We're doing Sorrow Divine plus Corrupted Soul Belt. That's how we get our decent raw HP. We're combining that with the Tulas. I think it's a decent approach. It doesn't do as well as like something like a Lightning Coil and going full Fizz mitigation does against physical attacks. Like, for example, a Pathfinder doing Lightning Coil and stuff could take a Shaper Slam. So the downside is I'm not as good against Fizz. You know how normal Pathfinder setups do a lot of Fizz taken as. But the upside is, for a cheap budget, we do a lot better against elemental hits. Like, if you do a good Fizz taken as setup, this character is going to end up with like 3k life and no ES or something. Like, if you do a good Fizz taken as setup, it's going to be, on the budget I am on, you're going to end up with a lot lower HP pool, which is going to result in you dying a lot more to elemental damage. I view those elemental attacks as a lot more dangerous than the base Fizz hits. So that's why if I'm doing this on a budget, I think this setup makes sense. Once you start getting a really high budget and you can start really investing in getting good gear with good life on it, then doing Fizz taken as, Lightning Coil, those sorts of things starts to make a lot more sense, and it frees up some of your flasks. But my approach of thinking I don't have a ton of budget, I'd rather go some decent raw EHP as a route, that's what I went with. And during the fights, we paid for basically every 10D build I've done so far with one drop. Now, granted, other Uber fights I've done while doing this, we've dropped things that are worth money, but so far the biggest drop of the 10D challenge was an Awakened Cast on crit from Maven. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, this is the Toxic Rain Ballista Pathfinder. We are doing a series of defense through a bit of armor. I have Determination and a Granite Flask, and we're getting about 20k armor. That gives you about a 2k Molten Shell, which is decent. 12k evasion with Dread Banner. That's, I don't know what effective evade chance that is, maybe 70 effective evade. It's pretty good for most mapping situations. Then we have 60 suppress with Lucky. Sometimes that will count as 70 if we are on full life, which we are a lot of the time. So anywhere from 80 to 90 suppress roughly. And then our Chaos Res is just a bit under cap because Chaos Res is expensive. It just costs a decent amount, and 10D I just don't think is enough to fit it into builds when you're doing these challenges. We went for the route of going Ashes of the Stars to scale up the duration of Toxic Rain and give us a bit of quality on other support or on other gems throughout the build, like Dread Banner, increase aura effect on Dread Banner. We had stuff like Despair, which gives a bit of increased curse effect from quality. Withering Step, a bit more raw wither debuffs. You see it applies 11 when we click Withering Step. So just to start our initial damage on a boss, we can click Withering Step when we place all those totems. Blink Arrow for movement if we need to dodge an ability. And then we're running Haste and Malevolence. Haste gives us basically 52% attack speed because we get both the attack and the cast speed line. So our base level of speed, even though we don't always have Soul Eater stacks, is pretty decent between Haste, between Onslaught from our placing our totem, stuff like that helps out a decent amount. And then we have Malevolence, which is kind of dual beneficial for things like Toxic Rain, where Skill Effect Duration is basically another damage multiplier if you have an enemy that will stand in those toxic pods for the duration of the skill. I will also say I'm using a Mage Bane. This is part of the thing where I went over budget. This Mage Bane, Impossible Escape was 1 divine. This basically took me in one of the divines I went over budget. The other divine I went over budget was Anointing Sovereignty. So if you're wondering why I did 12D, I wanted to showcase this because I think Mage Bane is Impossible Escape Mage Bane extremely valuable in a build like this where you have access to these skill effect duration nodes, the life node that gives life recovery on Flask, and suppress evasion node. These are just really high value. So I wanted to showcase it even though it was going over budget. Hopefully that's appreciated. Outside of that, one thing I should say, for Toxic Rain, there's a breakpoint. Based on the wiki, it says 37 to 43% to get consistent overlaps. And in order for us to hit that, we did it through 20% from the mastery. We Warlord slammed on AoE on our cluster, basically our quiver. We basically got ourselves an artillery quiver and we did some basic essence crafting for, I had like screaming essences for Cold Rise and I just did that until I hit dot multi. And then I just slammed with a Warlord Exalt because it was 40C. That is about a 60%, 65% chance it hits AoE. It's like 1500 versus 10k weight. And if you hit AoE, then you can combine that with something like 1 jewel with 5% AoE. It's not a great jewel. It's Chaos Multi projectile damage, 2 module, but that gets us to 39 AoE to get us the overlaps. And then another thing I should address, because people are probably going to ask about it, is crafting your Chaos bow. That looks expensive for 10D. How did you do it? Chaos bows you can pretty much make for a little bit over 2D, and it's really, really simple. All you need is a few Dread Essences. You do this until you hit a okay attack speed roll, like T4 or higher attack speed. Doesn't have to be much. And then simply put, hopefully you have a 4 mod bow or 5 mod bow or whatever it is you need to annul off. So you have 2 open prefixes and 1 open suffix. For example, on this bow, I had hit chance to poison, chance to bleed, attack speed, and +2 bow. That was where I started. It was 4 mods. I annulled off the chance to poison. Then you craft cannot roll divine or cannot roll attacks, which is a 1 divine craft. Then you Hunter Exalt and regular Exalt. Well, no, you don't. Sorry, you don't. I guess it doesn't matter what order you do it in, but you get Exalt, you guarantee to hit +1 socket because the only attack mod on the prefix pool is +1 socket on bows. And then when you Hunter Exalt, the only prefix mod you can hit is chaos damage over time. So that's how the craft works. At the time of doing this craft, Hunter's Exalt was 1 divine, so it's 1 divine for the bench craft, 1 divine for the Hunter Exalt, and then a bit of chaos for a few essences just to get an okay attack speed roll. That's how you craft a bow like this. If you're wondering, it's super straightforward, not expensive, and it's part of the reason why Chaos bow characters are honestly pretty good league starters, because their bow that is like very high damage doesn't cost too much to craft. It's fairly deterministic. So that's the idea behind the bow. And then everything else was mostly just a few of cheap key uniques like Atula's, Wilma's, Replica Soul Tether, Soul Ascension, and Ashes. Some pretty strong uniques that are just pretty undervalued in the current economy, I think. Soul Ascension particularly is one of those gloves where if you have a really OP build, it starts to not be worth because you're killing the boss so fast you don't ramp the Soul Eater stacks. But if you have a decent build that isn't really OP damage yet, Soul of Ascension is a great DPS increase for a lot of basically undergeared or weaker characters, and I've been enjoying trying it out this league. Aside from all that, yeah, that's the Toxic Rain Pathfinder. That's how I chose to go about it. I feel like this is a pretty strong character for the price. Anyways, as always, hopefully you guys enjoy these 10D builds, and take care, Exiles, and peace out. Have a good one.